This is the story of the most successful night fighter mission in the Pacific theater of World War II. Major Carroll Smith and his radar operator, First Lieutenant Philip Porter, flew a P-61 Black Widow called Times a Wastin on the night of December 29, 1944, and shot down 4 Japanese aircraft in a single mission off the coast of Mindoro in the Philippines, an achievement no other American night fighter crew would match in the Pacific War. This single night made Major Smith the top-scoring American night fighter ace of the war, with 7 total confirmed kills. And to put that in perspective, only 3 P-61 crews in all theaters of World War II became aces. Smith and Porter were the only Pacific P-61 aces, and the entire Pacific P-61 force scored only 64 confirmed kills throughout the entire war, which means this one mission accounted for more than 6% of all Pacific P-61 victories. 3 things will help you understand why this achievement was so remarkable: the aircraft they were flying, the incredibly difficult nature of night fighting in 1944, and the operational situation in the Philippines that December. The Black Widow, America's first purpose-built night fighter, was the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. And I want to emphasize that phrase because this wasn't a daytime fighter with radar bolted on as an afterthought. Every aspect of the P-61 was designed from the ground up around the requirements of night interception, and it showed. Named after the venomous Black Widow Spider, the aircraft was massive, the largest fighter to serve with the U.S. Army Air Forces in World War II, and comparable in size to medium bombers like the B-25 Mitchell. The wingspan stretched 66 feet across, the fuselage measured 49 feet and 7 inches long, and it stood 14 feet and 8 inches high. Empty weight came in at 23,450 pounds, and fully loaded for combat, it could weigh up to 36 to 200 pounds. But despite its size, the P-61 was no slouch in the air. Top speed reached 366 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, the service ceiling topped out at 33,100 feet, and it could climb at 2,540 feet per minute. Range extended to 1,350 miles, giving it the endurance needed for long night patrols. The armament was formidable. 4 20mm Hispano cannons sat in a ventral belly tray underneath the fuselage, with 200 rounds per gun for 800 rounds total, and some variants also carried 450 caliber M2 Browning machine guns in a remotely operated dorsal turret on top with 560 rounds per gun. External ordnance capacity allowed for up to 4 bombs of 1,600 pounds each, or 6 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. Those belly-mounted cannons were revolutionary. Grouping all 4 guns tightly together eliminated the convergence issues that plagued wing-mounted weapons, and it also meant ground crews could service the guns without needing platforms or ladders. But most important for night fighting, the low position meant muzzle flash wouldn't blind the pilot's dark-adapted eyes, a critical advantage when you're hunting in total darkness. The twin-boom configuration placed the cockpit and weapons bay in a central nacelle, with the tail surfaces connecting 2 engine booms, and this design provided exceptional stability during pursuit and gave clear fields of fire for the dorsal turret. Spoiler ailerons incorporated into the design would later show up on the B-52 bomber. Power came from 2 Pratt & Whitney R2800 65W radial engines producing 2,250 horsepower each. Crew complement ranged from 2 to 3 people, a pilot, a radar operator, and sometimes a gunner for the dorsal turret. Between 1942 and 1945, Northrop built 706 P-61s plus 36 F-15A photo reconnaissance variants for a total production of 742 aircraft. But the real innovation that made the P-61 a true night fighter was the SCR-720 airborne intercept radar. This system weighed 412 pounds, significantly lighter than its predecessor, and could detect aircraft targets at ranges of 3 to 5 miles while searching a 180-degree forward sector. Development of this radar required approximately 172,000 man-hours by the MIT Radiation Laboratory. May 26, 1942, marked the first P-61 flight with test pilot Vance Breese at the controls. The first combat mission came on June 25, 1944, flown by the 6th Night Fighter Squadron over Saipan, and 5 days later, on June 30th, Lieutenant Dale Haberman scored the P-61's first kill. Charles Lindbergh flew the P-61 during the war and reportedly called it an exceptionally fine airplane. Throughout World War II, P-61s shot down 127 aircraft plus 18 V-1 flying bombs, and in the Pacific Theater specifically, they accounted for 64 confirmed kills. That might not sound like a lot compared to daytime fighters, but you have to understand that most night fighter patrols ended with 0 enemy contacts. Finding an enemy aircraft in the darkness over thousands of square miles of ocean was like looking for a needle in a haystack, a very fast and very deadly needle that didn't want to be found. The challenge of night fighting. Let me paint a picture of what night fighting actually involved in 1944, because it was nothing like what you might imagine from watching movies or playing video games. First, consider the environment. You're flying over the Pacific at night with no moon, or if there is one, it's obscured by clouds, and below you is black water, while above you is black sky. There are no city lights to orient yourself by, and no landmarks, and if your instruments fail, you're flying blind in every sense of the word. Hours pass in the cockpit as you maintain a patrol pattern, hoping that somewhere in the hundreds of cubic miles of airspace around you, there might be an enemy aircraft. Your eyes are adapted to darkness, which means the faintest light. Even the glow from your instrument panel can temporarily ruin your night vision, and you can't just shoot at any radar contact, closing to within 1,000 to 2,000 feet for positive visual identification was required, because the last thing anyone wanted was to shoot down a friendly aircraft. In the darkness, with your adrenaline pumping, you needed to identify the silhouette, confirm it's hostile, position yourself for a firing solution, and then engage, all while that aircraft might be taking evasive action or shooting back at you. Perfect coordination between 3 groups of people who couldn't see each other made the process work. First, ground-based radar operators would detect incoming aircraft and use radio to vector the P-61 toward the target, a process called Ground Control Intercept, or GCI. Then the radar operator in the back seat of the P-61 would pick up the target on his SCR-720 scope and start calling out headings, range, and altitude corrections to the pilot. Finally, the pilot would use a smaller pilot's indicator scope to help close the distance, then rely on his eyes for the final visual identification. Any breakdown in that 3-stage chain meant the enemy escaped. Major Carroll Smith himself described the experience in words that tell you something about the man. Rather a thrilling experience, if you haven't tried it before, on a good black night. That quote comes from the book American Night Fighter Aces of World War II by Andrew Thomas and Warren Thompson, and Smith's understated description, calling it rather thrilling, while describing hunting enemy aircraft in total darkness, where one mistake could send you into the ocean, shows the kind of calm professionalism you needed to be a night fighter pilot. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron. Activation of the 418th Night Fighter Squadron came on April 1, 1943, making them the first Pacific Night Fighter Squadron deployed from the Army Air Force's Night Fighter Training Program. Initially, they flew with P-70 aircraft, modified Douglas A-20 Havoc bombers, converted into night fighters. But in September 1944, they received the P-61 Black Widows, and that's when things really started to change. The squadron went through an extensive tour of the Pacific, operating from New Guinea, Hollandia, the Philippines, and eventually Okinawa. Over the course of the war, the 418th scored 20 confirmed enemy aircraft kills, plus 1 probable, and they also destroyed more than 30 aircraft on the ground through bombing and strafing missions. By late 1944, the squadron's commanding officer was Major Carroll C. Smith with service number 0418144. He went by the nickname Snuffy, and his radar operator and partner was First Lieutenant Philip B. Porter, service number 08876. Smith was already an experienced combat pilot by December 1944, having scored 3 kills in November and early December, building a reputation as one of the squadron's most successful pilots. But what happened on the night of December 29th would put him in a category all by himself. Arrival at San Jose Airfield on Mindoro in the Philippines came just 5 days earlier, on December 24, 1944, Christmas Eve, and the timing wasn't coincidental. American forces were preparing for the Lingayen Gulf invasion on Luzon and needed night air defense for the naval task forces gathering off Mindoro. December 1944 turned out to be an exceptional month for the squadron. In just 13 nights of operations, they destroyed 12 Japanese aircraft, and Smith's 4-kill night alone accounted for 1/3 of that total. The squadron history notes that they apparently obtained respect by the Japanese command, who were not willing to further risk their dwindling aircraft supply to the P-61 threat. In other words, the Japanese started avoiding areas where they knew P-61s were operating, jettisoning their bombs and turning back when P-61s were detected. The psychological impact was as important as the actual kills. Incidentally, the 418th had at least one crew member who would become famous after the war for entirely different reasons. James Dickey, who would later write the novel Deliverance and become a celebrated poet, flew 38 missions as a P-61 radar operator with the 418th and earned 5 Bronze Stars for his service. The squadron's lineage continues today, by the way. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona is home to the 418th Test and Evaluation Squadron, activated in 2021. The night of December 29, 1944. Now we come to the mission itself. Evening on December 29th found Major Smith and Lieutenant Porter taking off from San Jose Airfield on Mindoro in their P-61 Times a Wastin, a name sometimes spelled Times a Wastin, that reflected the crew's eagerness for combat and their impatience with the long, uneventful patrols that characterized most night fighter missions. Their assignment was providing night air defense for U.S. naval task forces in the waters off Mindoro. The Lingayen Gulf invasion was imminent, and Japanese aircraft had been probing American positions, conducting harassment raids, and attempting to strike the vulnerable ships gathered offshore. The Japanese had a tactic called Washing Machine Charlie, night raiders who deliberately unsynchronized their engines to create a distinctive droning sound designed to keep American troops awake. It was psychological warfare as much as bombing, and by late 1944 the P-61s had dramatically reduced these harassment raids. On this particular night, the Japanese were more active than usual, and Smith and Porter were about to have the night of their lives. Ground Control Intercept vectored them toward an incoming aircraft when the first contact came, and Porter picked it up on his radar scope. It was a Nakajima J1N1, codenamed Irving by the Allies, a twin-engine Japanese fighter. Now here's where the skill comes in. They didn't just point the aircraft at the target and start shooting, because Porter had to track the target on his scope while calling out heading corrections, range, and altitude changes. Smith had to fly the aircraft smoothly while following Porter's directions and monitoring his own pilot's indicator scope, and they had to close the distance without losing contact, without colliding with the target, and without being detected too early. This first chase went on for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of flying through clouds in total darkness, with Porter calling out corrections and Smith making constant adjustments. And finally they broke through the clouds and Smith got a visual identification. He closed to firing range and triggered 2 bursts from his 20mm cannons. The Irving went down. 1 kill. But they weren't done. Minutes later, another Irving was detected approaching the convoy, and this time the intercept was cleaner. They closed to approximately 800 feet, and Smith destroyed it with a single burst of cannon fire. 2 kills. At this point, most crews would have been celebrating because 2 confirmed kills in a single night was exceptional, but Smith and Porter returned to Mindoro, refueled their aircraft, and went back out on patrol. The 3rd kill was the most challenging from a pure flying standpoint. They detected a Nakajima A6M2N, codenamed Rufe, a floatplane version of the famous Zero fighter, but this pilot was flying low, just 200 feet above the water. Think about that. Smith had to descend to an extremely dangerous altitude in the darkness, maintain control of his aircraft just above the ocean surface, and position himself for a firing solution, all while tracking a target that was barely higher than the waves. One miscalculation, and they'd have flown straight into the Pacific, but Smith got the shot, and the Rufe went down. 3 kills. After midnight, as December 30th began, they got their 4th contact. This time it was a Nakajima Ki-84, codenamed Frank, a Japanese Army fighter and one of the best aircraft in the Japanese inventory. The pilot was Sergeant Akira Kusano. Smith and Porter went through the intercept process one more time: track on radar, close for visual identification, position for firing, engage. The Frank went down. Sergeant Kusano was killed. 4 kills in a single night. When Smith and Porter landed at dawn, they had accomplished something unprecedented. No other American night fighter crew in the Pacific Theater would ever match 4 kills in a single mission, and those 4 victories, combined with Smith's 3 previous kills, made him the top-scoring American night fighter, ace of the war with 7 confirmed victories. 7 might not sound like a lot compared to daytime aces who scored dozens of kills, but night fighting was a completely different game. Remember that only 3 P-61 crews in all theaters became aces, and in the Pacific, Smith and Porter were the only ones. Official confirmation of the kills appears in the 418th Night Fighter Squadron records, and Air Force historical sources recognize them. The identification of the Japanese aircraft types and pilots came from post-war analysis of Japanese records. The technology. I want to take a moment to talk about the technology that made this mission possible, because it's easy to gloss over the radar operator position without really understanding what that job entailed. Lieutenant Porter was sitting in the back of the aircraft in darkness, staring at a cathode ray tube display. This was 1944, decades before computer screens became commonplace, and the SCR-720 radar display showed blips of light representing aircraft. Porter had to interpret those blips, distinguish between friendly and enemy contacts, judge altitude and bearing, calculate closing rates, and provide continuous corrections to the pilot, all while the aircraft was maneuvering in 3 dimensions. The radar itself was a technological marvel. Development by the MIT Radiation Laboratory required approximately 172,000 man-hours of work, and at 412 pounds, it was significantly lighter than earlier systems, which was critical for aircraft performance. Detection range extended to 3 to 5 miles, not a huge range by modern standards, but revolutionary for its time. But the radar only got you part of the way. Visual confirmation was still required before firing, a hard rule because mistakes in identification could mean shooting down friendly aircraft. Every kill required Smith to close to within 1,000 to 2,000 feet, get a clear look at the target silhouette, confirm it was hostile, and only then engage. This is why the belly-mounted cannon configuration was so important. Wing-mounted guns on most fighters had to be harmonized, set up so the bullets from each wing converged at a specific distance. And if you were inside or outside that convergence point, you'd lose effectiveness. The P-61's tightly grouped belly guns eliminated that problem, because wherever you aimed, that's where all 4 cannons would hit. And because the guns were mounted low, the muzzle flash went down, and away from the pilot's line of sight. This might seem like a minor detail, but in night combat, preserving your night vision was absolutely critical, and bright muzzle flash directly in front of you could temporarily blind you, which when you're flying in total darkness could be fatal. The combination of radar, radio communication with ground control, and the P-61's specific design features created a system that was greater than the sum of its parts, but it still required exceptional skill and coordination to execute, because technology can enable success, but it can't replace human judgment and ability. Controversies and verification. I want to address something about historical accuracy because it's important when we're talking about real events and real people. Night fighter kills were sometimes disputed because of the difficulty of confirming destruction in darkness. An aircraft could go down in the ocean at night and leave no trace, and in daytime combat, you might have multiple witnesses, gun camera footage, or wreckage on land. At night over water, you often had only the word of the crew. That's why I'm pleased to report that Smith's 4-kill night is officially confirmed in the 418th Night Fighter Squadron records and recognized by Air Force historical sources. This wasn't a dubious claim, but documented and verified. However, there is some discrepancy in the sources about Smith's total kill count. Some sources credit him with 7 confirmed kills, which is the number I've been using, while other sources list 5 confirmed kills for the Smith-Porter team. The discrepancy might relate to how team versus individual kills were credited, whether a probable was later confirmed, or different time frame cutoffs for counting. What's not in dispute is that the 418th Night Fighter Squadron history explicitly states, "The kills this month included 4 in one night, 29-30 December, by the team of Major Smith and 1st Lieutenant Porter, which along with previous victories made Major Smith the top night fighter ace." There was also a broader controversy during World War II about the P-61 versus the British de Havilland Mosquito. RAF tests in May 1944 found the P-61 too slow compared to the latest Mosquito variants. But U.S. Army Air Force's tests in July 1944 found the P-61 had better climb rate and tighter turning radius. Both services kept their preferred aircraft because the P-61's advantages included better low-speed handling and the ability to maintain control on one engine, while the Mosquito had higher top speed. Different aircraft for different doctrines. And yes, I'll mention again that the specific 80 minutes duration appearing in the title couldn't be verified from available sources. The mission spanned the night with at least one refueling stop, but without access to the actual after-action reports or specialized publications, I can't confirm the precise duration. For anyone interested in diving deeper, the definitive sources would be Queen of the Midnight Skies by Gary R. Pape and Ronald C. Harrison, and P-61 Black Widow Units of World War II by Warren Thompson. Records at the National Archives and the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum might contain more specific details. Aftermath and recognition. Major Smith continued commanding the 418th Night Fighter Squadron until mid-January 1945, when Captain William B. Sellers relieved him. Between the end of December 1944 and January 1945, the squadron scored 17 kills in just 3 months, a remarkable rate for night fighters. His actions earned Smith the Silver Star, and the citation reads in part, "For gallantry in action against the enemy while serving as pilot of a night fighter airplane of the 418th Night Fighter Squadron, 5th Air Force, in aerial operations in the Southwest Pacific Theater of Operations in 1944 and 1945. The last P-61 kill of World War II occurred on the night of August 14 to 15, 1945, the same night the Japanese agreed to surrender. The aircraft was nicknamed Lady in the Dark and flown by the 548th Night Fighter Squadron. Throughout the entire war, P-61s in all theaters shot down 127 aircraft plus 18 V-1 flying bombs. Pacific kills specifically totaled 64, which means Smith's 4-kill night represented more than 6% of all Pacific P-61 victories. That's an extraordinary concentration of success in a single mission. The P-61 today. Only 4 P-61 Black Widows survive today. Let me tell you about them because their stories say something about how we value or fail to value our aviation heritage. At the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum's Udvar-Hazy Center in Virginia, you can see serial number 438330, a P-61C variant on static display. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, has serial number 438353 on display marked as Moonlight Serenade from the 550th Night Fighter Squadron. In Beijing, China, at the Air and Space Museum, there's serial number 4239715, which formerly served with the 427th Night Fighter Squadron in the China-Burma, India Theater. And then there's the most interesting one, serial number 4239445, currently under restoration at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Reading, Pennsylvania. This aircraft crashed on Mount Cyclops in New Guinea on January 10, 1945, while serving with the 550th Night Fighter Squadron, and between 1989 and 1991, it was recovered in what can only be described as harrowing helicopter operations from a remote mountainside. Restoration has been ongoing for more than 45 years. Approximately 70% of the aircraft is new construction built to original specifications, and in 2024 the aircraft received its full paint scheme and Moonbeam Dream nose art. The goal is returning it to flying condition with civilian registration N55-NF, which would make it the only airworthy P-61 Black Widow in the world. Think about that for a moment. Of 706 P-61s, built only 4 survive, and we're trying to get one of them flying again after 45 years of restoration work. That's dedication to preserving history. Why this matters. So why does this story matter, and why should we care about a single night in December 1944? First, because it represents the pinnacle of a particular type of warfare that existed for only a brief window of history. Night fighting with airborne radar was a new capability in World War II, and within a few decades it would be completely transformed by jet engines, missiles, and advanced avionics. The kind of close-range, visual identification night fighting that Smith and Porter practiced is gone forever, replaced by beyond visual range missiles and infrared targeting. This was a unique moment in time. Second, because it illustrates the importance of teamwork and technology working together. Smith gets recognized as the top night fighter ace, and rightfully so because he was the pilot, the one who had to position the aircraft and pull the trigger. But none of it would have been possible without Porter's skill as a radar operator, without the ground controllers who vectored them to targets, without the engineers who designed the P-61 and the SCR-720 radar, without the maintenance crews who kept the aircraft flying, without the logistics chain that delivered fuel and ammunition to a jungle airfield on Mindoro. Individual achievement always rests on a foundation of collective effort. Third, because it's a reminder that numbers don't tell the whole story. 7 kills might seem modest compared to daytime aces with 20, 30, or 40 victories, but those daytime aces were operating in an environment where encounters were relatively common. Most night fighter patrols ended with no enemy contacts at all, and finding and destroying 7 enemy aircraft at night over water in 1944 with the technology available at the time was an extraordinary achievement. And fourth, frankly, because these stories deserve to be remembered. The men who flew these missions are gone now or soon will be, and we're losing the World War II generation at a rapid pace. Their experiences, their sacrifices, their achievements, these things shouldn't vanish with them. Major Carroll Smith and First Lieutenant Philip Porter, along with every other member of the 418th Night Fighter Squadron, volunteered to do one of the most difficult and dangerous jobs in World War II. They flew into the darkness night after night, hunting an enemy they usually never found, knowing that mechanical failure, disorientation, or enemy fire could send them into the ocean with no chance of rescue. And on one remarkable night in December 1944, they achieved something that no other Pacific night fighter crew would ever match. This is the story of how Major Carroll Smith and First Lieutenant Philip Porter, flying a P-61 Black Widow called Times a Wastin off the coast of Mindoro in the Philippines, shot down 4 Japanese aircraft in a single night on December 29, 30, 1944. It's the story of America's first purpose-built night fighter, a massive twin-engine aircraft equipped with revolutionary radar technology and designed from the beginning for darkness. It's the story of a type of warfare that required perfect coordination between ground controllers, radar operators, and pilots, where technology and training and experience came together to create a capability that hadn't existed before. And it's the story of the men of the 418th Night Fighter Squadron who owned the night over the Pacific and made the Japanese reluctant to risk their dwindling aircraft against the Black Widows. 7 kills doesn't sound like much until you understand the context. Only 3 P-61 crews in all theaters became aces. Only 64 Japanese aircraft fell to Pacific P-61s during the entire war, and no other Pacific night fighter crew ever matched 4 kills in a single mission. Major Smith's achievement stands alone. The P-61 Black Widow served for only a brief period from mid-1944 to the end of the war. Today, only 4 survive, and we're working to get one of them flying again. The men who flew them are nearly all gone, but the records remain. The 418th Night Fighter Squadron history, the Silver Star citation, the confirmed kill reports, and now, hopefully, a broader understanding of what they accomplished and how difficult it was. On a dark night in December 1944 in the skies over Mindoro, Major Carroll Smith and Lieutenant Philip Porter proved what skill, technology, and determination could achieve. They hunted in the darkness, found their prey, and made history. That's worth remembering. Retry.